Welcome back to the Today with Tally podcast, folks. We have a great show in store for you today. Our next guest is running for Congress in the state of Texas. But first,
hello, friends, and welcome to another exciting episode of Today with Tally. The mission and goal of this podcast is to bring an engaging conversation that will add value to the lives of everyday people. We will inspire, encourage, educate, and tell the stories of America's finest men and women in an effort to motivate you to live your life to its fullest potential. Be sure to follow us on social media and search Today with Tally. Be sure to subscribe, follow, and share the program as well. Ladies and gentlemen, your host of the evening, Mr. Brian Tally.
Caroline Kane is deeply rooted in Houston, Texas, and she's been a successful businesswoman, a very successful entrepreneur in the property management world. And she has decided to throw her hat in the ring to be a congresswoman. And with that, we are going to sit down and have a nice conversation with Caroline herself. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Of course, the pleasure is all mine. Look, we met at a veterans event a few months back, and we sat down. We had a good conversation, and you told me a lot of your ideas. You told me a little bit about your past and what you've been doing in the city of Houston for over 30 years. It has been truly admirable, and I thought that you'd be a great guest on this podcast, kind of add some real-life value, talk about, where you started, where you're at, and where you're headed down the road for endeavors. And I thought it was very interesting, to say the least.
Well, thank you. Yes, I started, I moved to Houston in 1983 and was here for high school. I'm an HISD graduate. It was a bit of a different animal back then. I think we're all having issues with how our schools are being handled and with our children right now. I began leasing apartments in 1991. I had attended the University of Houston prior to that, and moved up to a manager position within 2 years, and then a regional capacity within the first 6 years. Vice president of operations for a large firm, and that was immediately prior to starting my own company in 2012. So here we are. I have had issues with our politics and our government for probably the last 3 or 4 years. Knew that something was wrong, and now isn't it blaringly obvious that we have a problem? Houston, we have a problem. So my employees, got sick and tired of me belly aching about politics, and so when my email flashed, this is a random question, Caroline, but we want you to run for office. Is that something you'd be interested in doing? So that was my campaign contractor that reached out to me. And so I prayed on it and, talked to my husband about it. Is this something we really want to do? And wound up tackling it about 6 weeks later. And so here I am. I'm running for Congress, the U.S. House in CD7, which is currently occupied by Lizzie Fletcher. So prayers are welcome. Donations are welcome. I would love to bring this country back to the people. It's run off the guardrails, and we were asleep at the switch while it was happening. We let this country go a long time ago. We stopped being involved, stopped paying attention. We listened to the news, 30 minutes a day, and thought that we were caught up on what was going on. And as long as we, paid our taxes and kept our nose down, everything was fine. But while we were doing that, the fox got into the hen house, and here we are. So we've got to get this government back to the people. We need to reduce the size of the federal government by 75 to 90%. Get these agencies under control. I think half of them are useless, and the others that perhaps have a place in our future society need to be rebuilt from the bottom up. Mm-hmm. And that's my vision of how we can get this done in a peaceful manner, right?
Sure. Now, you're running for Congress, and we all know this. Let's get to know the entrepreneur. Let's get to know the Caroline Kane that came up, in your professional career up until where you are now. Now, you have been a successful businesswoman in the Houston metro area for the past 30 years, maybe even 32 years, as we mentioned earlier, specializing in property management. And you have always provided quality results for your employees and your customers. And those are a few things that we could talk about: your experience and your results, and additionally, your work ethic. Now, when you started working for somebody, what inspired you to become an entrepreneur and take the reins as a small business, additionally a businesswoman, and take on these reins in a very manly type world back 30 years ago when you're working in the property management arena?
So I started the company 12 years ago. So immediately prior to that, I had been vice president of operations for a large firm, owner-managed firm, and who wound up merging with another company. And I knew that merger was coming. And I thought, oh, okay, well, more responsibility and maybe a little bit more money is coming my way. I'm excited about this merger happening. And did not see it all coming that I was going to be a casualty of that merger. And so I was laid off. I got a great severance package, and just thought, how am I going to work for somebody else again? I'm very, at this point, I had been doing it for probably, I'm 32 years, about 20 years. And thought, this is something that I can do on my own. I may not know the ins and outs of payroll and paying payroll taxes, but I know I can outsource those things. And it was given to me in a dream. And I choose to believe it was by God that I needed to start my own company. And the following day, I jumped on LegalZoom, which, anybody who wants to start their own company, you don't have to use LegalZoom. You go to the Secretary of State and you'll save yourself several $100s. But I filed that LLC the very next day, and built it. So it took some of my 401k. I leased office space. I bought the software. So I built it assuming that they would come. And indeed they did come. So that was a step forward in faith. I think that God leads me, each and every day. Each and every one of us, he leads us. We just have to be able to see the signs when they're given to us. And a lot of people think it's coincidence or, that's just my subconscious, but it's the Father. When he talks to you, you just need to know that that's him. So sure. This was to me another, the congressional move was another one that was like that, because the day that I got the email to run for Congress was a day that I had to lay some folks off. So as one door closes, another one opens, and the Father tells us where we're supposed to go, and he gives us the strength to do it.
Sure, you get those signs, and it's up to you to visually see them, accept them, and answer that call to service once your number is called. Now, the name of your company, I believe, is Prosperity Management Services, correct?
That's right, yes.
Now, what does your day-to-day operations look like as you're running this company as an entrepreneur and as a business owner?
So we manage every aspect of a multifamily property, which is an apartment community. We also have a commercial, which is mixed use. It's got in the front, it's got retail, in the back as warehouses. So that we wound up with that by accident, and we said we'd give it a go, and we do a very good job with it. It stays 100% occupied most of the time. The first 2 years starting the company was setting up the bones of the thing, right? Policies, reminders. So like all of our properties are reminded when things are due. During rent time, we have a reminder that goes out, hey, make sure and post your rent today. We have check scanners. On the 4th of the month, make sure and get your notices to vacate out for those that are late. Make sure you have coffee, refreshments in the office the 1st through the 3rd during rent time. Get your renewal letters out on time. It has to be done 35 days prior to the expiration of the lease. So there's just a lot of Texas property code that you have to jump through to do it effectively. So a lot of it is just building the structure of the thing. Once you've built the structure, it runs like a machine. But building that structure probably took a good 2 years.
Sure. Yeah, you had to get your blueprint set in order for you to proceed in a fashion that will make sense, for you, for your business, for your customers, and for the whole, management realm of things, to get everything out, like you said, fine tune that machine. Now, has your business ever been affected by, say, national policy or even local policy at the state level that you saw a great need for change that even perhaps sparked in interest in you running for elected office?
Absolutely. So the CARES Act, which I'm sure everybody knows is the omnibus that they passed, that was 1,000 some odd pages, that is the one that handed out the PPP money. So everybody associates the PPP money with the CARES Act. There's a lot in that CARES Act. And one of the detrimental things to my business is that we have to give a 30-day notice to vacate in order to file eviction. Well, in the state of Texas property code is 1 day. So if you didn't pay your rent on the 1st, we can issue your notice to vacate on the 2nd. Doesn't necessarily mean that we want you to move. It is a legal trigger because you can't actually file the eviction without having delivered that notice to vacate. Typically, we wait until the 15th or the 20th. We try to make payment arrangements with you. Then we file. So we're well behind the 8 ball at this point. We can't even file an eviction until 30 days after that notice to vacate has been delivered. So we typically deliver the notices to vacate on the 4th because rent isn't late until the 3rd. So we're a month behind by the time we finally do get to file the eviction. And then the courts, ever since COVID, are, I think, purposefully backed up. So it used to be, in the early days, probably 2 weeks to get your court date. Prior to COVID, it was probably 3 weeks to get a court date. And now you're looking at about 6 weeks to get a court date. And they're depending upon the jurisdiction. So you're dealing with different constables. If they grant you the notice to vacate, it's anywhere from 1 to 3 or 4 more weeks before someone physically comes to move their assets out of the apartment. So it has been awful. During the COVID epidemic, we couldn't evict anybody. That was part of the CARES Act as well. That portion did have an expiration that's been terminated. But the portion that requires us to give a 30-day notice does not have any expiration. So somebody has got to go in and say, listen, that portion of the CARES Act needs to be terminated.
This is very interesting. And I've always had a lot of these questions. And I think I know the answers to a lot of them, but I'm going to ask them anyways, just to get it out there so people can engage and listen to this podcast in a way that they can kind of follow and track and say, wow, I didn't know that. Now, you are, right in this boots on the ground, property management. You've seen it all. 2020 hits. And did people stop paying their rent completely?
Yes.
Okay.
I had units that owed as much as, say, $20,000 by the time we got them to court.
So people stop paying their rent. And I know for a fact that a lot of states, governors even came out publicly and said, don't pay your rent.
Yeah, ours did gratefully, but yes, they did.
And when I saw that, I was very taken back on why a government entity would come out and encourage people not to pay their bills. Additionally, the very bill that keeps a roof over their head. Now, were the owners that you represent ever reimbursed from the state?
So COVID funds were handed out and it was distributed through a company called Baker Ripley. There are questions as to, let's just say that Baker Ripley really needs to be audited. I'm not going to complain because eventually they did pay the vast majority of what was owed. They are the ones who handled, and it was millions and millions of dollars. And in some instances they overpaid. So I would end up with a resident that was 2 or 3 months prepaid by the time we got our money. So a little bit sloppy. I was grateful to have the money, but to me, this has always gone back. And let me just back up for a second. The state also interferes with lease contracts. So the people that I represent, that we manage the property for them, they are a small business, right? It's a small LLC. The majority don't own another property. This is an investment for them. But what happens is our legislature goes up to Austin and winds up leasing an apartment for the summer, and then they pay late. And then, they've got these late fees and they get angry. So now we have legislation about how much late fees we can charge, whereas we have a private contract between two individuals. Whatever they agree to is whatever they agree to. And so now, we're not supposed to exceed this amount on our late fees. And so most of the Texas legislation is written from a personal aspect from members of Congress because of bad experiences they perceive in the apartments that they've rented while they were there. So, legislation, the legislature really doesn't have any business in a contract between two small parties, in my opinion.
So was it your responsibility, or did you get paid for by providing a service on fighting on behalf of your clients to get that recovery that was, that they needed to recoup their losses, so they didn't essentially lose their livelihoods and their long-term investments?
No, there wasn't like any kind of bonus in it for us. No, I mean, of course not. The properties at that point were struggling as well. Delinquency was it was higher. Those were the largest numbers in delinquency that I have seen in my 30 years. So it was insane.
So basically they were on their own at that point.
Who?
On your clients, on trying to recover the losses.
Oh yeah. And so get this, you might have heard about mortgage abatement, I think was what they called it, or mortgage, where you could not pay your mortgage for 2 months. And so people mistakenly thought it was going to be tacked on to the end of the mortgage, which is usually what happens. If you call, say you've got a car and you want to miss a payment, you can call and they'll tack that on to the end. So instead of having 50 months left, you'll have 51 months left.
Right.
That's not how this was written with the CARES Act. So if you take 2 months off from paying your mortgage, starting on month 3, you have to start paying it back, because by the end of 12 months, you have to have repaid those 2 months payments that you missed, or else they'll foreclose. And so that's actually happening to homeowners right now who didn't understand that. Half of these foreclosures are people who did the same thing. They took 2 months off, thought that it was being stuck on to the end of their mortgage, and it's not. It was due within 12 months. So they're all sitting there delinquent. And that, to me, it's a land grab. I mean, they want to take our property. Because it was never, gratefully, we have attorneys in the apartment association that have read the CARES Act top to bottom, construed it, told us exactly what was going on so that I could tell my clients, listen, don't fall for this. We need to keep making the mortgage payments, period, end of story. We can't, what makes us think that in 90 days we're going to be more wealthy than we are now to pay a fatter mortgage than we would pay right now? We can't do that. But it did happen to a lot of homeowners. It happened with people's cars during the CARES Act. They did the same thing. Instead of tacking the car payment onto the end, it was due within 12 months, those 2 payments that they missed. So there's some shenanigans that have been going on with the CARES Act.
And, I don't want to come across as empathetic or, non-sympathetic to a lot of people that literally did lose their job. Millions of Americans were left with no income. So I definitely was in support of giving them a month or 2 or even 3 of just getting through the process, getting through this pandemic, and getting back to some sort of normalcy to where you can go out there and gain that employment, so you can turn around and repay all of that. But I do believe it should have been tacked on at the end and not just free money, because all that did was teach a lot of Americans that they didn't really need to work to get all of this free money, if you will, and not pay their bills and all that. So like I said, I was in complete support of giving some leeway there on a lot of people when they needed it the most in the most crucial time of their life. But again, you got to finish it. You've got to pay it back, because so many of the people that suffered on the end, at the very end, are just regular day-to-day people that maybe own an apartment complex, maybe own a home, and this is their retirement. This is everything, their blood, sweat, and equity that they've poured into this, and now they're losing it due to no fault of their own, with no real justice on their end on recouping a lot of their losses. So again, that's just not fair to so many people that have always done everything in an honorable way, and now they found their end on the losing end of a stick here.
Well, and were played by it. I mean, at least in the case of individual homeowners, they had to sign, like a 60-page document. And somewhere in that document is you have to pay this back within 12 months. It's not tacked on to the end. Nobody ever told them that. And so that's why a lot of people right now are facing foreclosure, because they got behind those 2 months, not knowing that they were actually behind. They thought it was being tacked on to the end. So there's some hijinks going on with the CARES Act and them trying to foreclose on folks.
So we are seeing a rise in foreclosures in the Houston area?
I wouldn't say in the Houston area, but we had the most foreclosures first quarter this year than we have had in like 15 years.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting, because everywhere I look, all I see is new homes and new builds and everything going on. This must, again, a lot of things that they don't really tell us unless you're really involved in the business. And like I said, your boots on the ground, you see it, you turn keys every single day. And so obviously you would know, what's going on, having, being right smack dab ground zero in this industry. So,
yeah, well, I watch the real estate market. So Houston, Texas, in particular, I mean, we never really shut down, maybe very briefly, right? But got it together fairly quickly, such that those people that did take the 2 months off got that paid back as soon as they figured out what was going on. It's a good place to live. It always has been. The cost of living is reasonable. It's folks in markets, and so I would be speculating, but I don't think that foreclosures are up in Houston. Nationally, they certainly are.
Sure.
A lot.
Now, you are no stranger to helping folks in need. When Hurricane Harvey lingered over the city of Houston in 2017, dumping, some 50 inches of rain in like a 3, 4, 5 day period, flooding was, immense, across the city. A lot of people were left stranded, homeless, and really there is a desperate need and a desperate call to action out there to help so many that were, struggling and have literally lost everything. Now, you had stepped up and provided a lot of support and a lot of relief in the community and helping with the rebuilding efforts. Can you describe what that was like?
It was just for our portfolio. It was traumatizing because, nobody could really get out in the middle of it. So, and I don't know if you remember, but communications were kind of shoddy. So immediately we started to make a spreadsheet of people that were reporting things. So we had their name, their phone number, unit number, which property. So the second that we could get to the property, that we could immediately start servicing whatever was wrong, and had lined up dehumidifiers, water extraction with 2 different companies, because, everybody was super spread thin, but I wanted to make sure that we were at the top of the list with contractors to go and extract this water, because that's key, is getting the water out as quickly as possible. So then immediately got water out there to the folks that they were sitting there without power. It was just chaos, and offered if we had units, like we had units that were affected and units that were not affected. So made sure that we had towels and places to shower and places for them to sit and whatnot. While if we could, we got the water out of their unit and got dehumidifiers in there so that they could get back in. And some of them were just too bad. And on those, we do require that they have renter's insurance, and they did, call on their renter's insurance and get it handled that way. But, never stopped communicating with these people because it was just terrifying. Terrifying.
Now, when these folks were displaced, did you help get them to a hotel or get them further inland and get them something else rented until those, apartments or homes were completely, refurbished and were able to be inhabited again?
Well, unfortunately, no. No, it becomes very costly. I mean, if you start to, and it's not my dime, right? This is, it's the owner of the property. Mm-hmm. It's their money, but we did accommodate with the existing units that we had, and gave them places to sleep, gave them places to shower. One of the properties was a big community to begin with, like everybody is friends with everybody else. That one worked out beautifully. So they're cooking in the kitchen, they're all cooking for each other. Mm-hmm. There was one of those properties, it wound up being about half the property that was affected, like all the downstairs units. And I don't think there was a hotel that could have accommodated them anyway. Sure. We had the Red Cross down on that property, right away offering. Yeah.
And I wasn't saying like on your own time and on your own dime. I just didn't know if you had, resources of, that were readily available to you that were contacting you saying, hey, look, we can take 100, we could take 50, we could take 25, and then pass that along to your customers so they could pass it along to their tenants to get them out.
At the Clear Lake property, there's a Motel 6. It wasn't anything fancy, but they did offer us a special rate for our residents.
Hey, a roof. I mean, at that point, that's all you need. It's either a roof or standing in 6 feet of water. So I think they take
or 3 or 4 units, because basically our vacancy, like at any given time, is usually like 4%. So I mean, we were scrounging just to find whatever units we had that were vacant to get them clean enough. Make sure that they were not filthy, so that they could use them while we figured out what could be done for them long term. Mm-hmm. It was not a fun time. But then, I also heard about other properties where, and I understand this, you've got the property managers and their staff who have damages to their homes. And so they're not focused on the residents. And, my staff from the get-go, we are all on the same page. These residents come first. If you need to run home and let a contractor in, fine, but get back and get to the residents. Let's get them handled within the first 48 hours so that we can get on with our repairs, whatever's wrong in our homes.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a catastrophe, to say the least. And that puts you into the 80, 90 hour a week realm trying to figure things out there during that time. I mean, you've been through some crises here over the last couple of years here in Houston. 2017, 2020.
Fall out of the secondary mortgage market in 2008. And then Ike in 2007. So those 2007 or 2008, back to back. And who would have thought with the fallout of the secondary mortgage market that, Class B and C apartment communities would be affected by that, right? You're talking about mortgages. Yes, there were some bank failures, but nothing really that Houstonians bank at or Texans bank at. But within 60 days, our occupancies dropped 10% across the board after that happened. It was just this massive effect. And because everybody's 401ks were affected, and if you had, I'm really bad at telling the future with this stuff, because if you had asked me, 6 months before that, listen, if we have, some kind of market collapse, how's your occupancy going to be? And we're not A properties. That's not what we do. We do B and C class properties. I think, the newest one I have is like 1995. You wouldn't think that we're going to be affected, but we were instantaneously almost. And so going into the last quarter of the year, I'm like, okay, feet up, holidays are coming, life is going to be good. Surprise, occupancy tanked. And then with COVID, our delinquencies are through the ceiling. I mean, I had never seen anything like it. But at the same time, the value of these properties is increasing exponentially. And so we wound up losing properties, that we'd had for a long time, years and years, and because they were offered this ridiculous amount of money. They were never going to sell it, right? It made good money for them. But they were offered crazy money up until the interest rate started to adjust in 2022. So starting at COVID, March of 2020 to April of 2022, the values of these things probably increased by 30%. 30%, yeah, crazy.
Insane. I'm going to take a quick 30-second break here to give a shout out to today's show sponsor, Chase's Choice, our great friends out of Canyon City, Colorado, an industry leader in cannabis and hemp products. Check them out online today at chaseschoice.org or call Ken directly. He's the owner. He can sit down with you and kind of go through a plan and get you started on something that will definitely improve the quality of your life. 719-371-0768. That's 719-371-0768. Now, Chase's Choice continues to engage in open conversation on the benefits of cannabis and hemp, CBD, CBG, CBN, THC, and all of the other cannabinoids found in the plant through extensive research and development. Now, this, guys, is alternative medicine, and it does work, and it's taking the place of all these pharmaceuticals that our country is continuously pushing on people, especially veterans coming home with post-traumatic stress, first responders, ER clinicians, so on and so forth. If we have a medicine out there that can help improve the quality of your life, why wouldn't you give it a shot, folks? The side effects are slim to none, if really zero. And you are really taking the place of something that is really doing a lot of harm in your body. Call Chase's Choice today, 719-371-0768, or go online, chaseschoice.org. Folks, we are back with our great friend here, Caroline Kane, who is a Houston, a small businesswoman, a Houstonian for well over 32 years. And we're just talking about what she does as an entrepreneur in the city of Houston and property management. And she's also thrown her hat in the ring to become the next congresswoman in Texas 7, Congressional District 7 in Houston. Now, I want you to explain something to me here. What is the female maverick of the year?
It is like a trailblazer, someone who sets the standard. So that to me, that was a really neat award. I believe I won the silver on that one.
Now, this all stemmed from your efforts from what you did during Hurricane Harvey?
I think that I don't think so. I think it was probably more development, team development. My connections with the real estate investment market. Just being able to build the company to the level that I had at that point. There was a write-up in the Houston Business Journal about the Hurricane Harvey, and perhaps that helped me to get the Female Maverick Award. That was, it was a surprise for me. And it was a huge honor.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And folks, Caroline belongs to so many different organizations, local and national, and even serves on the Forbes Real Estate Council, providing insights for senior level real estate executives across the country. So folks, she is very well versed in what's going on in the real estate market, property management, entrepreneurship, leadership at every level, and which I think makes her a very good candidate for Congress. And that's exactly where we're going to head right now. Now, what makes you a great candidate for the people of Texas 7?
I have fire in my belly for this country. There are days where I have wept for the condition that we find ourselves in. And as I said, I was called to this. I know that this is something that I'm supposed to do and that God would give me the strength to get it done. They're coming after our children. These transgender modifying genital mutilation surgeries that are just taking place with basically a high school counselor or even a middle school counselor, sending you to a social worker, not a psychiatrist, not a psychologist, a social worker. And, within 2 weeks, they start you on these puberty blockers and, send you for gender reassignment. To me, it's just diabolical, this plan. I know that many of our people are demoralized by it. Parents feel like they don't have any control over the content that's being spewed out by our schools, the narratives that are being spewed out by our schools. Our rights are all being trampled upon. The First Amendment, freedom of speech, being censored. I don't know if you've experienced that or not. But when you try and tell the truth about something, you wind up being censored and labeled. You're a racist or an anti-Semite. I mean, you name it, that, it's projection, right? They want to project onto us what they truly are and keep us from getting our messages out. Second Amendment, they've been coming for our guns. Every time that there's a mass shooting, we all just cling on to them for dear life. And to me, that is strictly outlined in the Second Amendment, in the Constitution. I don't believe the Constitution is a living document. It means what it says, and it says what it means. Skipping on to the Fourth and Fifth Amendment, we've got people that are spying on our devices constantly. That's the Patriot Act. There was nothing patriotic about the Patriot Act. All it did was strip us of our rights. And I think they have admitted to violating the Patriot Act 478,000 times since 2001. So spying on our devices, on the things that we do and things that we say and where we're going. We have no privacy. And so that, to me, is illegal search and seizure, right? They're searching our devices constantly. We have a right to due process, and we're seeing parents getting arrested at board meetings. We're seeing, our January 6 prisoners sitting in jail without being charged. So zero due process, zero speedy trial. They're not even charged. I mean, it's barbaric. We are a banana republic. The way that our country is operating right now, the FBI is weaponized against us. They're arresting parents and investigating veterans. It's a sad place to be. And so either we get a lot of people who feel like me and need to get this government well under control by reducing the size, right? We're all paying way too much taxes. Taxes to me are taxation is theft, in my opinion. But we can do a whole lot better. We need, I don't know, maybe 20% of the agencies that we have right now. What is the FDA doing? They're approving lethal drugs to be injected into our children, into us. They're approving lab-grown meat for consumption without any kind of trials, any questions. They got a no questions letter approval. So now we've got, and you know where it comes from? They're growing it from cancerous tumor cells. That's the lab grown in a bioreactor for 2 weeks. And they're going to feed that to Americans. We've got GMO food, which if it's genetically modified, what is it doing to our genetics? We should not be eating anything that is genetically modified to do anything. We need, if we can, I encourage everybody to get heirloom seeds and try and grow what you can, or buy the heirloom fruits and vegetables. So these are so many priorities, so many atrocities against the American people. I could go on.
Folks, we're being joined by Caroline Kane, who is running for Congress in Houston, Texas 7, and she just highlighted some of the things that she sees as as harmful in not just the state of Texas, but in the United States, coming directly from her. Now, with everything that you just stated there, why do you believe all this is happening?
There is some kind of agenda with these corporations. We are being ruled by the corporations. So like 87% to 90% of what we touch every day is owned by BlackRock, Vanguard, or State Street Capital. They are the ones pushing the ESG, which is equity, social, and governance, right? So that's the whole Bud Light thing. That is Ford putting a rainbow on their trucks. That is Target. So they own all of these things. So they get their board members on the board and they sign up for this ESG or the diversity, equity, and inclusion. And, well, I should say, and the diversity, equity, inclusion. These agendas are meant to demoralize, divide. I know that they, when you think of equity, that would be fairness, right? But what they do is divide. All they do is highlight your differences rather than uniting us. We're all born into a body, right? We don't have any choice about what color it is. It's like the car that you drive. I saw a great video where this guy did this analogy of our body being a car that we drive. I'm not the car. I'm inside of this car, but it's a white blonde car. And there are people that are in a brown car. It's just our souls are all the same. We all bleed red, and we are letting them divide us with all of this nonsense. It's a perversion. It's a perversion.
My take on this is, regardless on what side of the aisle you are on, left, right, doesn't matter. Our country is angry. I'm 46 years old, and I've never seen our country so angry. And
Yeah.
It's not healthy. And I think that there is a time and a place that Americans, we the people, need to sit down and discuss on an open forum what's going on, how you feel, and come to some sort of, conclusion that will suit both sides here. And I just don't see that happening in the future because we have become a radicalized nation. Whether people like to think so or not, you have people on the left who are absolutely radicalized, and you have people on the right who have been absolutely radicalized. We have forgot what middle is. We have forgot what, President Reagan, the greatest president, I think, in the history of our country, brought to the table. And that, being American, is, something that, is unlike anything else. I mean, the pride of being an American, the God-given rights and the liberty and the freedoms. And, unfortunately, when you have a country that has become absolutely radicalized and absolutely so just discouraged, and so, the hope in this country and the faith and everything else I see is just dwindling more and more every single day, because you have the media, you have politicians, you have everybody at each other's throat. And politicians, I think, in my eyes, have a great responsibility to not show the mudslinging and them attacking each other, because all that does is it just greenlights citizens to go out and do the same thing. If you see your member of Congress completely attacking somebody on Twitter and going off on somebody in an dishonorable way and slandering, that gives everybody else the green light to go out and do the same thing. However, that member of Congress isn't going to be held accountable, but you will be. And again, it's both sides. I think there's a lot of hatred out there. And again, it is not healthy for a country to sustain this long term. And people have been at each other's throats now for well over 3 years. And at some point, it's got to stop, because we can't continue going down this same highway, because it just won't end well. And I really do believe that there are a lot of things, in our country that could be at stake, like in a lot of things that you've been talking about. And I think freedom is one of them. I think freedom of speech is another one of them. But regardless of what people think, or, whatever, I know we all have our own opinions in this, in this country, and we should be able to share those opinions freely. And like the way I've always operated is with honor, with true fashion, and, to be as sincere and genuine as I most possibly can, and try to understand each side the best I know how, so we can, again, come to some sort of a mutual agreement on how our country is going to be ran here moving forward. But again, it all starts with transparency, and it all starts with accountability. And I do believe that it all starts with God first and foremost.
That's right. That's right. We are being divided on purpose. We are being manipulated. To what end? I don't know. But a country divided cannot stand.
Mm-hmm.
We know this. And so we need to stop allowing the division. I'm to the point now where they ask you your race on your application or whatever you're filling out. I want to say it's none of your business, because it doesn't matter. We need to stop letting them. And it's something that's kind of always been a thing, but a small thing. And then it's gotten bigger and bigger. And now they're asking for your pronouns and how you identify sexually. I won't participate in it. I'm just not going to. These are not appropriate questions. It doesn't matter. We're all just people. And we've got to stop letting them divide us. And it is intentional. Antitrust laws, when I make it to Congress, antitrust laws will be among the first things on my desk. BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street Capital are the top investors for 90% of the things that we consume. And so where you have an illusion of choice, you don't really have a choice. These are monopolies. And they have been in place for the last 30 years. You just think there's a difference between Coke and Pepsi, but there's not really. They're owned by the same companies.
So the word I guess I was looking for was compromise. I had to do a lot when I was working in Congress for 3.5 years on pushing the legislation you see behind me now that finally passed and was signed into law. But it does take a lot of compromise, and compromise is a good thing. That means that people are sitting down, separate sides of the aisle, and, talking things through rather than, again, attack. And we can't always just be on the attack, folks. We are Americans. We need to start acting like it. Now, you have thrown 30 different agenda items at me. What are your top three? Give me your top three agenda items, how you will serve your constituents of Texas 7. And the way I look at a candidate for Congress is you have to serve all of your constituents, not just one side or the other. How will you serve your constituents of Texas 7, and what are your top three agenda items?
Probably the most popular on both sides of the aisle is to repeal the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, which is unconstitutional. We are using a fiat currency, which is not constitutional. It's supposed to be gold-backed or asset-backed currency. We're also finding ourselves getting into a place where people won't take cash, also unconstitutional. The Constitution calls for that. Even your dollar bill says legal for all debts, period. So by law, you should be able to hand someone a dollar bill and they should take it. But they're trying to move us away from that. before the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, the United States got its revenue from taxing imports. So what have we done over the last 30 years? Made all kind of trade deals that sell our soul of the nation, sell out our factory workers, so that when you flip anything over in your home, it's not made here, it's made in China. So that's got to stop. I think, President Trump had started that to try and tax China appropriately, but of course that's all been repealed again. There is plenty of money. If we were to go back to what the Constitution says in terms of what the responsibilities are of the federal government, which is, maintain a military, protect our borders, there's only a number of things. Fund those things. Perhaps we have a little bit of a flat tax, but get rid of the IRS. Income taxes are unconstitutional. So I think both sides of the aisle can get behind it. I've had economists saying, oh, that's not going to work and this and that. Well, with 75% less agencies breathing down your throat, we've got the EPA now on standby in Palestine, Ohio, because they're going to take their land because now, of course, it's condemned and contaminated. And it's going to put these people out of their homes. Does the EPA have that right? Where did they get that right from? So these agencies are acting as an arm of the executive branch, right, of the president. The president doesn't have the right to take your property. There is eminent domain, and that is a local jurisdiction, and they have to pay you fair market value. But it doesn't say anything about the EPA coming in and deciding whether or not your land is contaminated. They've just lost a case at the Supreme Court regarding swampland. If you had some standing water in your backyard, they were going to come take your land and declare it swampland. So there's land grabs happening. So the EPA, the FDA, if we can get these agencies substantially smaller, and perhaps we have, agriculture pay a small fee to have their own board of directors that is hired. I don't know, but it's a similar scenario as the VA scenario, right? Where they're self-policing. The EPA self-polices. The FBI self-polices. These are all issues, and they're all coming to a head. We're seeing the corruption everywhere.
Yes, I do believe that self-policing should not be happening in this country, because at that point, there's no transparency, because they can create their own transparency. And if you create and generate your own transparency to try to appease the American people, oftentimes it's going to be synthetic. And that's, we need other companies or whatever it may be, or other organizations or agencies to go in there and do the policing of a lot of these agencies. And I do, agree with that wholeheartedly. But we are running out of time here, folks. If you want to connect with Caroline Kane, you can do so on her website right there listed on the screen, CarolineKaneForCongress.com. That's CarolineKaneForCongress.com. And with that, I would like to thank you for joining us today. We wish you nothing but the best of luck here moving forward in your future endeavors. And, we appreciate, I know the city of Houston does appreciate all the efforts that you put in every single day, not only as an entrepreneur, but a champion in the community that you've served for decades.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a fantastic evening.
Yes, ma'am. Now, folks, it has never been easier to listen to the Today with Tally podcast. We're on Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Facebook, and Twitter. Folks, always remember to stay inspired, stay encouraged, stay motivated, and always stay in the fight. Until next time, for Today with Tally podcast, this is Brian Tally. Good night. Semper Fi.